VANCE froze, $1.4 billion in Medicaid fraud. 800 providers were suspended. Fewer than 20 called to complain. Where are the Democrats who were screaming 2 months ago? I need you to hold two facts in your mind at the same time, because the contrast between them is the most revealing thing that has happened in American politics in years. Fact one. Earlier this year, Democrats were lighting their hair on fire about Medicaid cuts in the One Big Beautiful bill. Senator Bernie Sanders declared it a death sentence for struggling Americans. Senator Elizabeth Warren called efficiency reviews a huge scandal. AOC said Vice President Vance was guilty of an absolute and utter betrayal of working families. Hakeem Jeffries took to the House floor screaming about almost $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, harming children, families, seniors, people with disabilities. Fact two. On May 13th, 2026, the same Vice President Vance announced that 800 hospice providers in Los Angeles had their Medicare payments suspended because the data showed overwhelmingly that they were running fraudulent operations. Vance's anti-fraud task force has now frozen approximately $1.4 billion in federal funds tied to fraudulent home health and hospice providers. The administration sent letters to all 50 states requiring documented evidence of active fraud prosecution. They deferred $1.3 billion in Medicaid reimbursements from California alone because California had been ignoring years of documented fraud warnings. And from Senator Sanders, Senator Warren, AOC, Hakeem Jeffries, crickets. Silence so deep you could hear a participation trophy collect dust. If you actually cared about protecting Medicaid for vulnerable Americans, finding and stopping the fraud that is draining Medicaid would be your top priority. The fraud is not coming from the people who need care. It is coming from the operators who fraudulently bill for care that was never delivered to patients who never existed from addresses that turn out to be empty lots. The silence tells us everything. It tells us who the Democrats were actually protecting when they screamed about Medicaid cuts. And it was not the seniors. The 800 hospices. Let me give you the number that should end this debate permanently. The Trump administration's fraud task force identified 800 hospice providers in the Los Angeles area whose billing patterns were so egregiously fraudulent that payments were suspended pending investigation. Not slowed, not reviewed, suspended. 800 businesses lost their federal revenue stream. You know how many of them called to complain? Fewer than 20. Less than 20 out of 800. I want you to think about what that means, because I am a science teacher and I deal in evidence, and that is evidence. If the federal government cut off my paycheck tomorrow because they suspected fraud, I would have an attorney on the phone before the ink dried on the letter. I would be filing appeals, documenting every service I ever provided, and making so much noise that every congressional office in my state would know my name. My family has bills to pay. My employees have mortgages. I would fight. 780 of these 800 businesses had nothing to say. No appeal, no lawyer, no protest, no phone call, no statement, nothing. Because ghost operations do not appeal. Shell companies with locked doors and empty offices do not have attorneys on retainer. Fraud schemes that charge the federal government $1.4 billion for services that were never provided do not send strongly worded letters when the money stops. As Vice President Vance himself put it, if your core business was shut down by the federal government, would you call? He said yes. He noted the answer from 780 of the 800 was crickets. He is right, and the math is devastating. Dr. Oz added another detail that ought to be front page news in every newspaper in America. 1/3 of all hospice providers in the entire United States are somehow clustered in the greater Los Angeles area, not California. Los Angeles. There are not that many people dying in one city, not even Los Angeles, where the governance quality would suggest otherwise. They estimate at least half of those Los Angeles area hospices are fraudulent. CMS suspended 800 of them. Indiana, with a fraction of New York's population, logged 4 times more Medicaid fraud indictments than New York State in a single year. New York runs a $100 billion annual Medicaid program and found 9 cases worth prosecuting. Does anyone seriously believe New Yorkers commit fraud at 1/12 the rate of Hoosiers? Does anyone believe that with a straight face? If you do, I have a waterproof sponge to sell you. Equally useful, equally real. The answer is that Democratic state leadership is not pursuing fraud. And the question that ought to keep every taxpayer awake at night is why? The gravy train. Let me follow the money. Because that is what the Democrats always tell us to do. Follow the money? Fine. Let us follow it. When the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, health insurance company stocks were worth roughly what they were worth before. Standard, reasonable. Then the ACA went into full implementation in 2014. The individual mandate kicked in, the government subsidies started flowing, the Medicaid managed care contracts exploded. Suddenly, every American was legally required to purchase insurance or pay a penalty, and the insurance companies were the beneficiaries. Here's what happened to insurance company profits, approximately $16.9 billion in 2010. By recent years, roughly $60.7 billion. That is a 3.6 times increase. Their stock prices up approximately 1,032% from passage to the present day. The S&P 500 went up roughly 251% in the same period. The ACA did not control healthcare costs. It launched the most lucrative decade in the history of the American health insurance industry. Premiums went up, deductibles went up, out-of-pocket maximums went up, access went down, costs went up. Quinn's Law, number 1. Always. The exact opposite of the stated intent. Every single time. The stated intent was affordable care. The result was a government-mandated customer base for insurance companies protected from competition, guaranteed payments through federal subsidies, and profitable beyond anything the industry had ever experienced before the party that fights for the little guy handed them the keys to the treasury. And what did the healthcare sector do with some of that money? The same thing every industry does. When it benefits from a policy it donated to the politicians who passed and defended that policy. In 2008, before the ACA, the health sector gave Democrats about 55% of its donations. After the ACA passed and the profits followed, that proportion held and in some cycles grew. Total health sector donations went from roughly $2 to $100 million in the 2008 cycle to $4 to $130 million, and climbing legal donations, disclosed, searchable on open secrets. Follow the money. They told us to. I did. The ACA was not a healthcare reform. It was a revenue-sharing agreement dressed up in compassionate language. Democrats got the policy, wins. The health industry got the mandatory customers. And the American middle class got a higher premium, a bigger deductible, and a lecture about how grateful they should be. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is what the numbers show. DOGE, Medicaid fraud, and the remarkable coincidence. Now let us talk about DOGE. From the moment DOGE launched, the left treated it like the apocalypse. They screamed about cuts. They screamed about harm to vulnerable people. They filed lawsuits. They staged protests. Senator Warren described DOGE's fraud finding as a huge scandal. I genuinely could not figure out when I first read that what the scandal was supposed to be. The scandal that the government found fraud? The scandal that federal money was not going where it was supposed to go? Then California sued the federal government to stop the fraud investigation. Minnesota sued to stop the fraud investigation. They sought temporary restraining orders to prevent the government from pursuing Medicaid fraud in their states. I want to be very precise about what I am saying here. I am not saying Democratic politicians received illegal kickbacks from the 800 suspended hospice providers. There is no evidence of that, and I will not assert it. What I am saying is this: when the government tries to find fraud, and you fight them at every turn, when the government identifies 800 fake businesses, and you say nothing, when the government asks states to prove they are pursuing fraud, and 2 blue states sue to stop it, you have to ask who benefits from the status quo. And you have to ask whether the political infrastructure of those states, the donors, the vendors, the managed care contracts, the organized labor and health services, the community organizations that receive federal pass-through funding, has a financial stake in the continuation of an oversight-free environment. The fraud is not just stealing from taxpayers in the abstract. It is stealing from the actual patients who need the programs. It is the 89-year-old woman who had 5 to 1,000 skin substitute procedures billed to her Medicare account. It is the California psychotherapist who showed up to use her Medicare benefits and found her account had been drained by identity theft. It is the gang in California that maxed out a mother's EBT card before she could buy her children's groceries. If your constituents are the victims of this fraud and you are fighting the investigation, you are not protecting them. You are protecting someone else. The question worth asking is who? The silence speaks. Senator Sanders told us that Medicaid cuts are a death sentence for struggling Americans. I assume then that he will immediately demand a full investigation into why New York, the state represented by his colleague, produced 9 fraud indictments from a $100 billion Medicaid program. I assume he will hold a press conference to demand California cooperate with federal investigators. I assume he will stand at a podium and say that every fraudulent dollar stolen from Medicaid is a dollar that does not reach a struggling American. I am waiting. AOC declared Vance's budget votes an absolute and utter betrayal of working families. She will obviously be leading the charge against the fraudulent hospice operators in Los Angeles, her media market, who billed $1.4 billion for services that were not provided to patients who, in some cases, did not exist. Those fraudsters betrayed working families far more concretely than any budget vote. I expect her statement momentarily. I am still waiting. Hakeem Jeffries took the House floor to thunder about harm to children, families, seniors, people with disabilities. Surely he will now be thundering about the Medicaid fraud that steals from those exact populations. The fraud that puts people into hospice care they did not consent to and did not need. The fraud that drains the funds meant for nursing home residents and disabled children and low-income families. Any day now. The silence from these people is not incidental. These are not people who are quiet by nature. Senator Sanders held a press conference in a snowstorm to oppose a bill he had not read yet. AOC was on Instagram Live within hours of any news event. Hakeem Jeffries can find a podium and a camera faster than a golden retriever finds a dropped sandwich. They are not silent because they did not notice. They are silent because the fraud crackdown goes after the infrastructure their party has built, funded, and protected in blue states for decades. It threatens the managed care system that generated the post-ACA profits that helped fund the party that protected the managed care system. It is a machine. DOGE is breaking it. And the people who built it do not want that to happen. Quinn's Law number 2, if you want to know what liberals are up to, pay attention to what they accuse conservatives of doing. They accuse Republicans of hurting vulnerable people by cutting Medicaid. Meanwhile, the actual vulnerable people were being harmed by fraud the Democrats were either ignoring or actively protecting. A note on the ACA and where we are now. I want to be clear about something. I am not against providing healthcare to people who need it. I am against a system where the stated goal is affordable care, and the actual result is a 1 to 1,000 and 32% increase in insurance company stock prices and a 3.6 times increase in insurer profits, while American families pay higher premiums every year. The ACA did not make care affordable. It made insurance mandatory. Those are not the same thing. The Medicaid expansion that followed enrolled millions of people in a system that, as we are now discovering, was riddled with fraud from top to bottom. Ghost patients, fake providers, stolen identities, unnecessary medications prescribed to unknowing patients for the billing codes. 1/3 of all hospice providers in America somehow located in one metropolitan area. This is not a system that needs more funding. It is a system that needs an enema. And the same party that built it, funded it, and collected donations from the industries it enriched is now fighting the people who are trying to clean it up. The American taxpayer deserves better. The actual patients, the ones who truly need Medicaid, deserve better. The seniors whose identities are being stolen, the disabled adults who are being enrolled in programs without their knowledge, the low-income families whose EBT cards are being drained, they deserve the protection of a government that takes fraud seriously. Vance and Dr. Oz and the task force are doing the work. They are protecting the people the Democrats only pretend to care about. And the Democrats who scream the loudest about protecting Medicaid have nothing to say about the people actually stealing from it. That tells you everything you need to know. But what do I know? I am only a science teacher who spent 2 decades teaching students that following the money is not a conspiracy theory. It is basic research methodology. And that when someone fights harder to stop an investigation than they ever fought to prevent the underlying harm, the investigation is probably getting close to something they do not want found. If this article made you think, like this article, so the algorithm shows it to people who need to read it. Share this. Every share really helps get the word out. Comment below. If Democrats truly care about protecting Medicaid for vulnerable Americans, why are they silent about the fraud destroying it? Tell me. I want to hear the argument. And if you want more of this, the data, the history, the science, the stories, join Beaskey's Classroom community or follow me on YouTube. Even better, subscribe to my account. It is about the cost of a cup of coffee per month. That is it. Your support keeps this classroom open, and I promise I will never run out of material as long as the left keeps trying to outdumb itself.